Right. Let's unpack this. We are diving into a really huge political paradox today, all centered around Nepal.
Hmm.
For you, the listener, just some quick background. Nepal's had six different constitutions since its democracy really began.
Yeah, it's survived, I mean, everything from a royal massacre to abolishing the monarchy entirely, becoming a federal republic. It's seen massive changes.
And yet, despite all that, fundamental constitutional change, one core problem just sticks. It remains completely unsolved.
Political instability. It's the constant.
It really is astonishing when you look at the research we've gathered. The statistic that just, well, it stops you cold is this. In Nepal's entire democratic history, since the system began, not a single prime minister has completed a full expected term.
Not one. It's quite something. Governments there, they rise and fall like, well, the source used the phrase sandcastles in a strong tide.
That paints a picture. Parliament functions. Technically, they hold votes.
Sure, the motions go through. But effective governance, actually delivering services, getting policy executed, it's constantly stalling. It is like the textbook definition of governance paralysis.
So that brings us to our core question for this deep dive. Is the Westminster-style system itself maybe inherently broken for Nepal?
Right.
And if it is, does Nepal need something really radical, like restructuring its government to adopt a directly elected executive leader just to finally get some stability?
Exactly. We're talking about a fundamental shift. Moving away from a system where the PM is picked by political parties within parliament
Sort of inside game.
to a system where the people, you the voter, elect the head of government directly. We're calling this concept a directly elected executive prime minister, or sometimes people might use executive president.
Okay. And before we dive deep into Nepal itself, I should look globally, right? This isn't a totally new idea.
No, not at all. Understanding the international track record is, I think, key here.
So when we look at systems where the executive is directly elected, or maybe shares power in a big way, what are the main models out there? The research points to three.
That's right. Three major international models. First, you've got the pure presidential system. The classic example is the USA, but also Brazil, Indonesia.
Okay.
Here, the president is the single directly elected leader. They're both the head of state and the head of government.
And what's the key feature of that model, thinking about stability?
Well, it guarantees stability primarily through fixed tenure. The leader gets a set term, 4 years in the US, often 5 years in other presidential republics.
Right.
Our source material mentioned 5 years as a kind of benchmark for stability, which, applies broadly. But the main point is, because the leader is elected by everyone, their job isn't dependent on daily votes or whims inside the legislature.
I see. So there's zero risk of the government collapsing just because of party squabbles.
Exactly. That predictability is a really powerful thing, especially compared to constant churn.
Yeah, that fixed term sounds like the complete opposite of Nepal's current situation.
Then second, you have the semi-presidential system. Think France, Portugal, maybe Russia.
Okay, how does that work?
Here, the president and the prime minister actually share executive power. Often, the president handles foreign policy, big picture stuff, and the PM manages the day-to-day domestic affairs.
Interesting.
And in France specifically, this system was designed precisely to bring stability and decisiveness after, decades of pretty weak governments before de Gaulle.
Right, okay. And the third model, that sounds like it might be closest to what's being debated for Nepal.
It seems so. That's the dedicated executive prime minister model. In this setup, the PM is directly elected by the whole country and gets a strong executive mandate.
Any examples?
Well, Israel actually tried this for a bit between 96 and 2001. And Sri Lanka, historically, has had a very strong executive role, whether termed PM or president.
So, looking at these models, how have they actually performed when stability is the main goal? You mentioned the US's predictable terms. What about other success stories in the data?
Indonesia is maybe one of the most compelling cases, especially for nations coming out of conflict or authoritarian rule.
Okay.
After 1998, they switched to direct presidential elections. And this change correlates pretty directly with more political stability, significant economic growth, and importantly, a noticeable reduction in systemic corruption.
Why the reduction in corruption?
Because the leader had a broad popular mandate. They could push through difficult anti-corruption reforms that maybe wouldn't survive intense party negotiation.
That's a powerful combination. Stability, growth, less corruption. But these systems must have downsides too, right? What are the warning signs from these global examples?
Absolutely. The warnings often pop up when power gets too centralized without enough checks. Sri Lanka is a key example here.
How's it?
The strong executive system there did create political dominance. And initially, yeah, it allowed for quick decisions. But it almost immediately raised fears of authoritarianism, of institutions getting weaker, especially when that power wasn't properly balanced.
That makes sense. And you mentioned Israel's experiment with directly electing the PM. Why did that one fail? That seems like a crucial lesson.
It really is. It's a classic case study in, well, institutional design doesn't always work as planned.
Okay.
Even though the Israeli PM had a direct mandate from the voters, they still had to build and manage a coalition in a very fractious parliament, the Knesset.
Ah, so the underlying structure didn't change enough.
Exactly. The constitutional setup didn't protect the PM enough from all that coalition pressure and bargaining.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the internal instability continued, and they abandoned the experiment.
So the lesson is, just changing how you elect the leader isn't enough if they're still basically hostage to the same old parliamentary math.
Precisely. It tells you that the whole system needs to be considered, not just the election method.
Okay, if we accept that analysis, that the real weakness is how parliamentary dynamics can just constantly undermine the executive, that leads us straight back to Nepal.
Mm-hmm.
Why are Nepal's problems so deep, so persistent, that such a radical change is even on the table? The research we looked at breaks down this governance crisis into 8 specific, pretty devastating failings.
Yeah. Governance paralysis is really the heart of it, and it spreads everywhere, across all government sectors.
Okay, so beyond the obvious number one political instability, which we've covered, this instability leads to the second problem, coalition hostage politics. Can you explain how that works day to day for the listener?
Sure. Imagine you have small political parties, maybe with just a few seats in parliament. But the governing coalition needs those few votes to survive.
Right, they become kingmakers.
Exactly. So they realize their vote is absolutely essential. And they use that leverage. They demand concessions, maybe specific ministries for their members, maybe chunks of the budget diverted to their constituencies, sometimes even getting allies off the hook legally. They essentially blackmail the government. And if the demands aren't met, they just pull their support and boom, the government collapses.
And third, all this constant changing of government must hurt Nepal internationally.
Absolutely. That's weak global credibility. If foreign governments, investors, international organizations know that Nepal's government is likely to fall in, say, 9 months.
Why bother?
Right. Why would they take long-term treaties seriously? Why commit major investment capital? Why engage in complex policy discussions with a government that might not even exist next year? It undermines everything on the world stage.
Which leads right into the fourth issue you flagged, no accountability. How does that play out?
Well, because prime ministers are constantly scrambling, fighting, just to please their own party bosses and these small coalition partners, simply to survive the next confidence vote.
Their focus isn't on the public.
No. They're inherently answering to this tiny political elite, these party insiders, not the citizens who theoretically voted for the parties in the first place. It completely severs that crucial link between the leader and the people.
And that broken link leads straight to point 5, the party first mindset.
It does. When the absolute top priority is always the survival of the governing party or the coalition itself, then the actual national interest, things like building infrastructure, fixing public health, long-term education reform, that stuff always takes a backseat.
It gets sacrificed for political maneuvering.
Always. Power preservation trumps national progress almost every time in such a system.
And this mindset, you argue, leads to the 6th and maybe the most dangerous problem, the capture of state organs. What does that mean, capture?
This goes beyond just, run-of-the-mill corruption, though that's part of it. Capture means that the core institutions of the state constitutional bodies, like the judiciary, election commissions, anti-corruption agencies, even the bureaucracy itself, become highly politicized.
So they stop being neutral.
Completely. Judges might feel they owe their position to political patrons. Police chiefs get appointed based on party loyalty, not competence or integrity. The entire state machine starts serving the interests of the ruling parties rather than upholding the Constitution or serving the public impartially.
And if all the checks and balances, all the oversight bodies are politicized,
then you inevitably get the 7th failure. Zero delivery. Budgets might get passed, policies announced, but long-term plans, development projects, they change every few months with each new government, each new coalition deal.
so people on the ground see no real improvement.
Very little. There's a constant sense of motion, but no actual progress in daily life for most citizens. Plans get scrapped, funding reallocated based on political rules.
And finally, the eighth point ties into that state capture idea. A weak bureaucracy.
Yes. The civil service, the police forces, the people who are supposed to actually implement policy neutrally, they become influenced by party politics too. Promotions, transfers, assignments can all depend on political connections.
Which means even a good leader would struggle.
It's disastrous. Because even if you had a well-intentioned prime minister trying to push genuine reforms, the system underneath them, riddled with loyalists from various political factions, could actively block or sabotage those efforts.
Wow. That list, it paints a really bleak picture. The current structure seems almost designed to prevent national progress.
It certainly appears that way from the analysis.
So the case for change seems incredibly strong. But okay, we have to talk about the trade-offs. What are the general upsides, the advantages of switching to a strong executive system that would specifically target these problems in Nepal?
The general pros are definitely compelling because they hit right at those pain points we just listed. First and foremost, the big one, enhanced political stability.
Right, a fixed term.
A government with a fixed term, elected directly, just cannot be easily toppled by these internal party games or shifting coalition loyalties. That stability is the foundation.
And it should create direct accountability, shouldn't it? The leader answers to the millions who voted, not just a few party leaders.
Exactly. That shift in who the leader is accountable to should, in theory, fundamentally reduce all that horse trading and coalition blackmail we talked about.
Less backroom dealing.
Hopefully. It frees up the leader, gives them the breathing room to actually focus on a 5-year plan for long-term development instead of just constantly looking over their shoulder, worrying about short-term political survival.
And like you said, international credibility would likely improve too.
Yes, absolutely. Foreign governments, investors, they're much more likely to engage seriously, make long-term commitments, if they're dealing with a stable, predictable leadership structure.
Okay, the benefits sound good, addressing Nepal's specific issues. And this is a huge but, whenever we talk about centralizing power, we have to raise the red flags. The potential for abuse. It's massive. What are the critical risks here?
The risks are profound and shouldn't be underestimated. The number one danger is that power centralization tips over into outright authoritarianism.
The strong leader becomes a dictator.
Potentially. Tied to that is the danger of promoting populist leadership.
Yeah.
A charismatic figure who uses the direct mandate to bypass democratic norms, institutions, maybe even the courts.
No, how do you stop that? How do you prevent a strong executive needed for stability from becoming a dictatorial one?
That's the absolute crux of the issue. You need critical, constitutionally embedded, ironclad checks and balances.
Okay.
And our analysis, the sources we looked at, are crystal clear on this point.
Yeah.
A non-negotiable prerequisite for adopting this strong executive system is that Nepal absolutely must strengthen its judiciary and parliament first.
Before making the switch.
Ideally, yes, or at the very least simultaneously and with guarantees. If those oversight bodies, the courts, the legislature, are weak and politicized, which, let's be honest, the report suggests they currently are,
Right.
then any strong leader, no matter how initially well-intentioned, could very easily become autocratic. There'd be nothing effective to stop them.
But that sounds like the ultimate catch-22, doesn't it?
It really does.
You need the stability from the strong executive system to fix the weak institutions. But you need strong institutions first to safely implement the strong executive system. How realistic is it to expect the very institutions currently suffering from political capture to suddenly find the strength to act as firewalls?
That is the absolute core difficulty, the central tension in this whole debate. It's a huge challenge.
So what's the proposed way forward then?
Well, the proposed solution outlined in the research isn't just elect a strong leader. It's a highly balanced model, tailored specifically, they argue, for Nepal.
Okay.
It involves adopting a directly elected executive prime minister, yes, but crucially, embedding that role within a framework packed with overwhelming constitutional safeguards. The idea is to make the power anti-authoritarian by its very design.
Okay, let's get specific then. What are these crucial safeguards? This sounds like a detailed plan, maybe 10 points or so.
It is quite detailed. It starts with defining the leader's mandate very clearly. The PM must have a fixed 5-year term, constitutionally protected. They cannot be removed just by party games in Parliament.
Okay, fixed term. What else?
The direct election itself must require a 51% majority rule. This is important. It ensures the PM has a broad, truly national mandate, not just squeaking through with, say, 30% of the vote in a crowded field. They need genuine majority support.
That makes sense. What about control specifically aimed at preventing that strongman scenario?
Mandatory term limits. Absolutely essential. A maximum of 2 terms, period, no exceptions.
Okay, 2 terms max.
Crucially, the plan demands a truly independent judiciary and strong independent parliament oversight. The parliament needs real powers to investigate, to question, to hold the executive to account.
And the PM's powers over other state bodies.
Severely limited. The proposal is clear. The PM must have absolutely no control over the media or key constitutional bodies. Think election commissions, human rights commissions, anti-corruption agencies. These must operate autonomously, shielded from political interference by the executive.
Those sound like really critical firewalls for democracy. What about just the structure of government, continuity?
They suggest establishing a vice prime minister. This provides clear succession planning if the PM can't serve, avoiding a power vacuum.
Good point.
There also needs to be a strict, mandatory cabinet size limit. This prevents the PM from just creating endless ministries to reward coalition partners or political allies, which keeps the government bloated and inefficient. It forces focus.
And accountability to Parliament, even with a fixed term.
Yes, high accountability. The plan includes a requirement for the PM to directly report to Parliament every 90 days. They have to appear, answer questions, justify their actions publicly, maintain transparency.
Okay, that's 9 points. What's the final, maybe the ultimate check on power?
The 10th point is a direct citizen recall provision.
A recall. So citizens could remove the PM.
Yes, but only under specific, strict conditions. If the PM commits grave misconduct, seriously abuses power, or violates the Constitution, the citizens themselves, likely through collecting a very high number of signatures to trigger a referendum, should have a mechanism to remove them from office, regardless of what the parliamentary parties think.
Wow. So that ties the PM's fate ultimately back to the electorate, not the political elite inside Parliament.
That's the idea. It's the ultimate popular check against serious abuse of power.
Okay, that whole 10-point plan, it sounds less like just get a strong leader and more like a complete systemic overhaul. It seems designed to solve the instability and simultaneously prevent the authoritarianism that strong leadership can sometimes lead to.
Exactly. It's presented as a systemic fix, not just hoping for the right personality to come along.
So what's the synthesis then? The overall argument?
The synthesis of the argument, based on the research, is really that Nepal doesn't just need more leaders or more elections within the current framework. It needs, and the quote used was, a system that delivers.
A system that works.
Right. The current structure is described pretty harshly as a recipe for instability, political brokerage, party-based corruption, and national weakness.
So, if the choice boils down to sticking with a parliamentary system that arguably has never really worked for Nepal versus trying a strong executive system that comes with these significant risks, where did the authors ultimately land?
The conclusion drawn is that a directly elected executive leader, while definitely not a perfect solution, and carrying massive risks if it's implemented badly or without those crucial safeguards,
Right.
is ultimately seen as better than a system that never works. If Nepal's fundamental goals are achieving stability, enabling long-term development, and gaining respect on the global stage, then this kind of radical reform is presented as not just an option, but perhaps a necessity.
Okay. That leaves us, and you the listener, with a really provocative final thought to mull over, doesn't it? Since the entire argument for this new, strong executive system hinges completely on the absolute requirement of strengthening the judiciary and parliament first.
The prerequisites.
Exactly. And those are the very institutions that are currently described as being weakened by political capture and corruption.
Right.
The ultimate question isn't just if Nepal is ready for a strong, directly elected leader. Maybe the deeper question is whether Nepal is truly ready or even able to undertake the foundational institutional reforms needed beforehand to make sure that leader strength doesn't immediately become the very authoritarianism that everyone fears.
That's the fundamental challenge ahead.
A huge question to consider. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.